G'day viewers, Jason, Joondalup Electrical Services. I've got a little bit of time on my hands at the moment, so I thought I'd do a little video on my little off-grid setup in my van. It's nothing flash, it's extremely basic, but it does everything I need, and I thought it may well help a few of you out also. This is something you can do as a DIY. You don't need to engage a licensed person, and it is all pretty straightforward. But what I'll talk about first is what determines whether you can do DIY or not. So in Australia, and most of everything I'm going to say is relevant to Australia, and in particular Western Australia, but I'm sure all developed countries around the world have their own licensing and certification systems, which would be very similar to what I'm going to say. So if you are working on 120 volts DC or below, then you can DIY. If you are working on 50 volts AC or below, then you can DIY. Anything above those amounts, then you need to engage a licensed individual to do them. So that's just a quick heads up on that one. And also, if you're a registered business trading and charging people to do electrical work, whether it's licensed electrical work or the lower parameters, then you would probably engage an auto electrician. And if you're in doubt, then engage someone anyway, because this sort of stuff, although it's only low voltage, it can go sideways real quick and start a fire and so forth. So it's always best just to be safe and use people that know what they're doing if you're in doubt. So what we've got here is a solar panel on the roof, and when I did this van I had no solar panels spare at the time, so this panel is literally off my own house. It's just a regular residential solar panel. I think it's a Canadian solar from memory, and that bracket you can see there going from the panel to the roof of my car is what we call a tin interface bracket, and that's what we use on a regular tin house to mount the solar panels to. Not the same way as I've done it there. We would actually have the railing bolted to that bracket and then special clamps bolting the panel to the rail. But I've just used those tin interface brackets, and as everyone in the solar industry would know, most of the solar railing and stuff and the brackets and everything you can be really creative with. I've used them for many different things over the years. But what I've done there is I've drilled a hole in the roof of my car, and I've used what's called a rivet nut, and that enables me to screw the bolt in to the car and then secure the panel to that bracket with another bolt using lock nuts and spring washers. That way it's not going to come off and fly off and cause an accident or anything like that. That's really important, you secure your solar panels appropriately. On my other car over east, that has roof racks on it and then the solar panel, which does make the car a little bit taller and of course a little bit more difficult to get through Macca's in the morning for that morning coffee, if that's your thing, because the height restrictions are a problem, and underground car parks and stuff like that. And then as you can see under the solar panel, I've just got a multi-hole gland, and that seals it extremely well going into the car, and that's literally just the two cables, positive and negative, coming off the solar panel. And that's perfectly capable of sitting up there on my roof doing its thing. And then it comes down to, I'll go in the back for that. So then, and there's many shortcomings, there's a couple of shortcomings with this system, because it is very basic, but there also are some things that you probably wouldn't do, just little safety things. I know they're okay, it's my own car, it's my own system, I know what it can and can't do. But if you were a business or, doing this on a, I don't know, a really expensive motorhome or something, then you'd probably take a few more safety precautions than what I have here. And just while we're on that, there is a particular standard in Australia and New Zealand that you must reference when you're working on motorhomes and transportable buildings, all that sort of thing. I think it's ASNZS 3001-2-2022. that is our standard that we must refer to, and a lot of what I've done here does not comply with that standard. But again, it's my system, and yeah, you know what they say, and I'm sure my wife would agree. Electrician's house is probably the worst one, or whatever, with as far as it goes to electrical work. But anyway, I'll explain the system here, and then I'll explain what I haven't done, which I probably should have done, and also the shortcomings of this very basic system. So that's my solar cables coming in from the roof. That's the other end of the gland up in there. You can just see it through the gap. Alright, that's a multi-hole gland, so it's not going to leak. And that comes down, my cables come down into my Victron charge controller, or MPPT, or solar regulator. And that's just your positive and negative terminals there. Then they literally come out of there down to my battery. Well, actually they go into my fusible link and to my shunt, and then they go down into the battery. Very simple, not difficult. And the key thing that makes this DIY is there's no fixed wiring. That's literally just a socket on the end of the inverter, and then I've got it going into a power board. So there's no fixed wiring. If you're doing fixed wiring, over here our mains voltage is 230 in the rest of Australia and 240 in WA, and places in America I think you're like 110 volts or something like that at the plug. But in Australia, if you're doing any fixed wiring, that is, you're terminating it with a screwdriver or something like that, and it's above those voltage limits that I explained, 120 volts DC and 50 volts AC, then you must use a licensed person to do it. You can't do it as DIY. So this is what enables this system to be a really easy DIY system. Everything is within the voltages that you're allowed to, and there's literally just that socket on the end of the inverter, and then I can put my power board, and what have I got? I've got my laptop charging, microwave, and the fridge. And we've got the battery cables coming out of the battery into the inverter. All very simple, and nothing too complicated. What have I done that I probably should have done? Well, okay, we've got a fusible link here. Actually, before I do that, I'll explain these individual components. So this MPPT, Victron use this sort of coding on their MPPTs. This number will vary and that number will vary. This is reference to how much voltage you can put into it, and that's the maximum amount of current that it will put out to charge your battery. Okay, so obviously you need to max your PV. If you're wondering what PV stands for, it's photovoltaic. It's always just abbreviated to PV, which also is just your solar. So your solar voltage must never go over that. You can of course parallel it and that sort of thing, but if you are paralleling solar panels, guys, just be well aware of your fusing. I'm sure you can Google that and find lots of information on that. I won't go into that right now. So that's your charge controller, or MPPT. This one I made a mistake. It's not Bluetooth, so unfortunately I can't see this through the Victron app on my phone, which was a bit of a bummer. You can buy a Bluetooth dongle and connect it to the VE Direct terminal, and that was just an oversight on my behalf. That little rotary dial there is for preset algorithms for different types of batteries, but when you set this up, you can go in and change all the parameters yourself, which is really important, and I'll get to that in a minute when it comes to getting the most out of your battery. So that's our charge controller. This is our inverter. This is an 800 watt inverter, and these come in 12 and 24 volt, I think, in the Phoenix Compact. This is a pure sine wave inverter, so it's not some cheap rubbish that's going to damage any of your sensitive electronics. And again, I won't go into the difference between a pure sine wave and a modified sine wave. You can look into that if that is of any importance to you, but you're always best off using a pure sine wave inverter if you can. I have absolutely flogged the crap out of this thing. I've had this in 3 different vans now. I've had it for about 8 years. And as an example, that's an 1100 watt microwave on an 800 watt inverter, and what I do is I set that to 50% power, and it just cycles on and off, and it's enough not quite to trip out that inverter. It will just keep cycling and the fan will go in it and it can cope. But if I were to overload it, as I do with the toasted sandwich maker there, that is way too powerful for it. It simply just cycles on and off, and you know, it's enough to get the toasted sandwich maker hot. I've been flogging that for years and years, and it's still going strong. So that's testament to the Victron product. Very impressive. All right, now working our way down here, we've got the Victron shunt. This is Bluetooth, so I can see this on the Victron app, which enables me to see the state of charge and how much power has gone in and out of my battery. With that in mind, it's important that you connect your cables on the correct side of the shunt so that you can see the power flow. This is from my charge controller. If I were to put that on this side, then it would be bypassing the shunt, and I would have no data storage for what charge has gone into it, only the discharge. That goes down to my battery. That there is just a spare fusible link for this here, which is my fusible link. It's important to make sure you fuse all your cables, which I'll go into in a sec. And that is there, and obviously always a good idea to have a spare one. And down here we have the battery. Now this is a dry power lithium iron phosphate battery. It's 12.8 volt, 100 amp hour, which gives me about 1.2 kilowatts of usable energy in that battery. Now obviously the way I've done this is far from ideal. I'd never do anything like that if I was doing it for a paid client, and as I said, I think I said, if I didn't, I'll say it again, I don't do this sort of work for paid clients. I only work on residential and off-grid solar and battery systems, and mostly just doing repairs and fix-ups these days. So what have I done wrong? Okay, so what I've done wrong is I mentioned that standard that you should refer to. You need to give consideration to what type of battery you're using. So if, for example, you were using a lead acid battery, you would have to be mindful that when a lead acid battery charges, it also discharges flammable gas. So they need to be well ventilated. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, they're relatively safe if you go with a quality brand and you set the charge parameters properly. This one has an inbuilt BMS, so it's kind of foolproof in a way. Now, where we get the problems, and if you speak to any fiery these days, they'll tell you the majority of fires they go to in domestic situations is for lithium batteries. Now, I've said it a lot of times, so I'll say it again. If you're buying lithium batteries off eBay, no name brands, or brands that aren't supported well in Australia, then you're kind of asking for trouble. It's not so much the battery's fault, it's the management of the battery. So when you overcharge a lithium battery, they get thermal runaway, and that's when you get the fires, and everything goes sideways real quick. So it's important that, if you're buying raw cells and making your own batteries, you really need to know what you're doing, and you really need to build the system and design it so that you've got all those safety measures in place. Buying a battery like this, buy a quality brand from a reputable retailer where the product has good support in Australia. So this battery in particular has an inbuilt BMS, which is battery management system. So what that means is if I go outside the parameters of this battery, say I overcharge it by putting too much voltage in it, it will disconnect from the charge supply. If I try and discharge it too quickly or try and discharge it too much, it will also disconnect from the supply. Now that is a safety measure, a very good safety measure for the battery to protect it. But what is also really important is that when you're setting up the charge parameters in your charge controller for the battery, that you consult the data sheet and you stick to those charge parameters, because if you're not charging it quite enough, then you're not going to get the full capacity out of the battery. This is 1.2 kilowatt hours. I think I said kilowatts before, it's kilowatt hours. And if you're not charging it to the correct voltage, you're not going to get the most out of your battery. So that's really important that you set it up correctly. Now, I've mentioned the things that I've done incorrectly on this. Now, if this were a lead acid battery, and say for example I didn't have a fuse in line with it and there were a short, then the full discharge of that battery is a huge amount of energy, and that's going to melt cables and start fires. Whereas this battery, it does have that inbuilt overload protection, so it will disconnect itself and protect itself, which is a fantastic feature. Alright, so that's really important with your battery and your battery choices, and sticking to that standard and being familiar with that AS standard that I mentioned, and putting these batteries in the correct locations so that it's safe, especially in motorhomes and things like that, guys, where you're sleeping and that sort of thing. I know with like insurers these days in Australia, I don't know about other countries, but I actually got asked when I insured this if it had any DIY battery systems and inverter systems in it, which at the time it didn't. But I did get asked the question, and I know a lot of insurance companies are shying away from motorhomes and that sort of, like, you know, vans like this, which have been done up into like a camper van sort of thing, because there is a problem with so much DIY electrics and not being done properly and causing issues. So I have put the fusible link on there, which is great. I prefer to use a fusible link other than a circuit breaker, because as in some of my other videos, I've shown what can happen with circuit breakers when you don't select the right size. And sometimes even when you have selected the right size, if it's a cheap, shitty brand, it won't disconnect under fault. And again, you get a bad situation where you get cables melting and so forth. So I prefer to use a fusible link, and I've got my spare one there, as I mentioned. But really what I should have here as well is a appropriately rated switch or disconnector, so that I can isolate the supply to the inverter in case of a problem, or if I'm going to work on it or something like that. But yeah, like I said, it's my system. I know what to do. I know how to work on it and so forth. I'd probably just disconnect one of the terminals. But in an emergency, obviously, that's not ideal. So really, I should have a disconnector switch. I should have a proper housing for this battery. That is definitely not suitable. You know, if something in here, you know, this chair, for example, it's got metal. If something metal were to drop down to there and cross on those two terminals, then that's a rather large short circuit. But again, it's a lithium iron phosphate battery with a built-in BMS. It will disconnect. But if that were a lead acid battery, then it would definitely be a very loud bang and a lot of heat and sparks going on. Definitely not what you want inside a camper van or anything like that. So that's that section there. This cable here going down to the battery. Now I've got this fusible link in here, but that is too big for this gauge cable. If, for example, there were a short here, say this cable popped out through vibrating and then accidentally touched the other side, I've got a dead short there across positive and negative. Now, this cable here isn't actually going to be able to carry enough current to make that fuse blow. I think that's a 150 amp fuse. So there's every chance it probably would in this instance, but say that was longer, say that was like 8 meters long or something like that, and that was a 250 amp fuse, there's a very good chance that this cable wouldn't have enough current carrying capacity to blow that fuse. So then what happens is the cable gets extremely hot and it melts and catches fire. So ideally I should actually have another inline fuse around about here to protect this section of cabling. Now, same goes for my solar cables. If there were a short on this side of the cable from the battery, so say I made a short there, it is possible in certain circumstances for this to end up carrying the full discharge current of that battery. However, The Victron MPPT does have inbuilt protection, so if there were a short circuit on this side, there is an internal fuse that is part of the circuit board in the Victron product that will blow. However, that's not a serviceable fuse. It's an integral part of the circuit board and is not able to be repaired by you know, your average person. It would need to go to Victron to be repaired, which the cost wouldn't justify it, so that would then become rubbish. So ideally I should have a fuse on here as close as I can down to the where it changes size cable, and I should really have one up here as well. And then further, if you've got paralleled panels up on the roof, you need to be mindful that paralleled panels can then carry more current in fault circumstances than just the one string, if that makes sense. That's series versus parallel. So that's something you need to be mindful of also. Now, in saying all that, as easy as this system is, these batteries aren't cheap. For good quality batteries, again, spend the money, get a good quality one. Don't be tempted by the cheap shit on eBay and so forth. By the time you've done that, bought the cables, bought the terminals, bought your switches, spent all the time doing it, got your solar panel and all that, to be honest, you would probably be better off buying something like a Bluetti if you've got the room in your vehicle. And then you can just plug it into your 12 volt adapter up the front there or in the back, and you can also plug a solar panel into it, because by the time you've done all this, it does get quite expensive, and some of those Bluetti products and so forth are actually pretty good and have got pretty good capacity, and it's portable. So if you want to sell the car, you can just take it out. If you want to use it in a different car, you can take it out, put it in a different car. You can still mount the solar panel on the roof, and you just plug it into the Bluetti or whatever product you want to use of that nature. Now, shortcomings of this system, and this is what sort of led me to doing this video. The other car I've got over east, I had some problems with the battery going flat. Now, ordinarily as a tradie, I occasionally sleep in the vans when I'm doing off-grid systems if I'm out in a rural situation, but I still wouldn't be smashing the microwave or the toaster sandwich maker or anything like that too much. It would get minimal use, and the battery has enough capacity for me on my own for a day or two. You know, I'm charging batteries for power tools, that sort of thing, maybe a light in a shed if I'm working late at night doing an off-grid system, that sort of thing. But for the other vehicle over in Canberra, over east, sorry, when we were down in Canberra, it was extremely cloudy for about 2 days and the battery went flat and I couldn't charge it. So what I would probably do differently is have another source of charging and not rely just on the solar panel, because we were using quite a lot of energy between me and my son, and we were spending a lot of time in the van. So what I would probably do, and I'll probably do that to the car when it comes back next month, is Victron do what they call an Orion, which looks similar to that, but what that enables you to do is to actually charge the battery from your alternator on your car. So when your car's running, much the same as it charges the battery in the car, you can also have it so that it's charging the battery in your off-grid system. So I definitely need to do that so that I've got that you know, additional source of charging. That's probably the best way of going about it. You can get different inverters, which are inverter chargers, which I could plug 240 volts into if I was at a caravan park or something, and that kind of does the same thing, but I just wanted to keep this all basic and you know, relatively keep the cost down. So I would add that Orion. Just be mindful doing that sort of thing. If your car has what they call a smart alternator, you do need to make sure that you get the right product to suit your car, and again, you need to set the right charge parameters to match your battery. So that's basically it, guys. That's a very basic DIY off-grid system that provides all the power I need for charging my power tools, my microwave, sandwich maker, that sort of thing, laptop and all that. Righto guys, cheers.